How do you rationalize or justify buying a particular commodity? Questions like these are addressed in this chapter. This chapter is fairly technical. It talks about how to measure certain issues. It will have some math, some formula, some applications. So it may sound a bit terse. However, the benefits to you of learning this chapter are tremendous. In fact, we can talk about two direct benefits of learning the material in this chapter. The first is that the tools we develop in this chapter, the tools of consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus, are used extensively in public policy analysis. These tools help us answer questions like which group benefits from a public policy change? Which group loses? What about the total? Is the society as a whole better off or worse off as a result of that policy? Some direct applications are in the issue of taxation. Whenever a new tax is being proposed, the policymakers do a study which uses the tools that we develop here to figure out the benefits, the pros and cons of taxes, trade policy, trade negotiations, and even when it comes to regulating certain industries. So this is a very relevant and applicable tool. And secondly, in this chapter, we will be able to grapple with and understand the meaning of one of the principles we discussed in chapter 1, that markets are the best way to organize economic activity. We hinted that it has something to do with efficiency, that markets are efficient and efficiency results in maximizing society's welfare. So in this chapter, we'll actually understand what does that statement mean. So, building on the second point, this is a graph which is familiar to us. We've seen it in chapter 4. We have a demand curve and a supply curve, and point E is the equilibrium. And so far we have stressed quite a bit that E is a very important point. It is the equilibrium. It is where buyers, those who want to buy, are satisfied. Those who want to sell at that price are satisfied. And thus, this is a desirable, efficient outcome. In this chapter, we'll also learn that for society as a whole, the welfare that they achieve as a result of this equilibrium is the best that they can be. A deviation from the equilibrium will result in a lowering of the welfare of society. Before I develop those concepts, there are some definitions we need to know. A key definition is called willingness to pay. Willingness to pay is essentially the maximum amount that you are able to or willing to spend on a good. Now, when you want to buy something, you have some idea of its value in your mind. If you value something very highly, you will pay a very high price for it. So the willingness to pay measures how much a buyer values a good. Now, this is best illustrated with a simple example. Consider market for iPod, and let's say in our market we just have 4 buyers. Anthony, who's willing to pay $250 for his iPod. Chad, $150. Kay, who really wants that iPod, is willing to pay $300. And John, who doesn't really care for an iPod at this stage, so will only pay $125. So let's collect this information and try to draw a market curve for iPods. So this curve will look a bit different than what you saw in chapter 4, and that's because we just have 4 buyers. When the market price is above 300, no one will buy that iPod. If the price falls below 300 but is above $251, we'll have only one buyer, Kay, because she was willing to spend $300. As the price falls further, let's say that the price falls below 250 but stays above 175. Then we will have the third buyer buying it, Chad, who is willing to pay 175. And when the price drops to 125 or below, we will have John also enter the market. John was willing to pay only 125, so he'll buy the iPod if the price is 125 or lower. So here we see that this is a stepwise function. Each step represents a buyer. In the last step, the bottom one step, we have had all 4 buyers in the market for iPods, because now it is at a price at which they can afford or they're willing to pay. In the real world, this would be a straight line. However, here, just because we have 4 buyers, we have a stepwise function. So let's look at it a bit closely. There's an idea called the marginal buyer. The marginal buyer is that at any given market price, the last person buying that good is the marginal buyer. For instance, if the price is $275, who's buying it? K. She was willing to pay 300, so she'll buy it if it's below 300. However, the next person, Anthony, was willing to pay 250. At that price, he will not buy the iPod. It's 275 above his, the price he's willing to pay. So K is the marginal buyer. She's the last buyer buying that good. So this first step is K's willingness to pay, then we have Anthony, then we have Chad, and finally we have John. So the last buyer to buy that good is the marginal buyer. If the market price is any higher than that, that person will probably not buy that good. So let's assume that the price for an iPod is $220 in the market. At that price, K will definitely buy it. She was willing to pay 300, the price is 220, and she buys it. However, at that price, we will also have Anthony buy that good. Anthony was willing to pay 250, the price is 220, within his reach, so he'll buy it. Now, Anthony is the last buyer buying that good. So Anthony is the marginal buyer. So let's see how much does K benefit. Now, K was willing to shell out $300. She lands up paying $220. So in her mind, she has just made a good deal. And this is an emotion that we also feel. If you're willing to pay, let's say, $50 for a pair of jeans, we go to a store, the jeans is on sale, we get it for $30, we feel happy. We feel happy because we just saved $20. Why did we save $20? Well, we valued that jeans at $50, but we landed up paying $30 for it. So in our mind, our benefit of that jeans, or our surplus of that jeans, is $20. In this case, K was willing to pay $300 for that iPod, and she pays $220. So in K's mind, she has made a good deal because she's come out $80 ahead. So K's consumer surplus is 80. And Tony's, well, his is 30. The difference between what he was willing to pay and what he lands up paying. So in this market, we have 2 buyers. If you want to look at the total consumer surplus, it is the sum of K's and Anthony's consumer surplus. So here's our first definition. Consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price line. So everything below the demand but above the price, which is 220, is a consumer surplus. It captures the buyer's extra benefit of consuming something. It's how happy they feel when they've bought it, because they've bought it at a price lower than what they were willing to give it. As I said, in the real world, we have a large number of buyers. Let's say that we're talking about shoes, and we have, let's say, several thousands of buyers willing to buy shoes. Let's rank these buyers based on how bad they want that pair of shoes. Let's say that the person who wants it desperately is willing to pay $60 for that shoe. That person will be the first one in the line. And then maybe there's someone who's willing to pay not more than $10. Okay, so let's just rank them in the descending order of how much they're willing to pay for the shoes. If we do that, we'll get a demand curve like this. On the leftmost point is the buyer who's willing to pay the most for that pair of shoes. And the rightmost point is the buyer who's willing to pay the least. In this case, it seems $5. So let's say that's me. I have a couple of pairs of shoes. I don't want an extra pair of shoes. If the price is $5, I'll just pick it up on sale, but otherwise I won't buy it. So now, suppose 5,000 pairs are bought in the market. So the 5,000th buyer is the marginal buyer. That person is willing to pay $50 for that pair of shoes. Now suppose that person goes to the store and finds that the price for shoes was $30. This buyer's consumer surplus is the difference between what he or she was willing to pay and what they'll end up paying. So 50 minus 30, which is 20. Armed with this concept, we can develop the idea of the consumer surplus in the entire market. So let's say that the market price is 30. At that price, we have 15,000 pairs of shoes bought. The consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price line. So it's the area of that triangle on the top. How do you calculate this area? Recall that the area of a triangle is half times base times height. So the base is 15,000, or 15, we'll ignore the 1,000 here, and the height is 60 minus 30. So the area is half times base times height, which is half times 15 times 30, which is 225, or $225,000. What's the meaning of this area? Well, this area represents the value to the buyers of the pair of shoes that they have bought. All these buyers have paid $30 for that pair of shoes that they have bought. At that price, we have had 15,000 pairs bought. A buyer who's willing to pay more for that shoe but lands up paying less has gained that difference as his or her surplus. You add the surplus of all the buyers and you get total consumer surplus. Now what happens when the price of these shoes goes up? Let's say that the price of shoes goes up to $40. As we know that the new consumer surplus is the area above the new price line and below the demand curve. The new price line is 40 and the demand curve is still the same. So it's this top triangle. And if you calculate the area, make sure that you get these numbers right. It's half times base. Base is 10 because now we have 10,000 buyers, times height, and height is 20. It's the difference between 60 and 40. 100 or 100,000. So as we see that there's a decrease to the tune of $125,000 when the price has gone up by $10. Why this fall in the area? Well, there are two reasons why this consumer surplus fell as prices went up. The first is that as price went up from 30 to 40, there were some buyers who were buying it before, who were willing to pay maybe 35, 33, $32 for that pair of shoe, but not more. So when the price went up to 40, these buyers simply drop out of the market. They don't want to buy that shoe anymore. Here we have 5,000 less buyers buying it. When these buyers leave, there's no way to measure their surplus. So we lose their surplus. At the same time, the buyers who are now buying it were buying it before also, but they're paying $10 more. So this green region is the region which is due to the loss in the consumer surplus of the existing buyers. These buyers would have bought those shoes before, and they'll still buy it now, but they're just paying more. So we have a decrease in the surplus of these buyers too. And the total decrease then is the green plus the blue area, which, as we said before, if you calculate and do the math, will be $125,000. Why is this surplus a big deal? Well, when you buy something, it makes you happy. However, there is no objective measure of gauging how happy you feel when you buy something. Right? So buyers saying that, oh, we are happy that we bought this or we consumed this, doesn't really have any interpretation or weight in public policy. As we said before, resources are scarce. The aim of economics is to maximize or get the most from the limited resources. So government sometimes has to decide on what projects to pursue, what policies to adopt. Even producers may have to decide how to price their product. Well, how do you put a price on these? Because when you make a policy change, you're moving resources from one use to the other. There'll be some who lose, there'll be some who gain. The best way to figure out is, if you are moving a service away from someone, ask them how much are they willing to pay for it, and how much are they paying for it in the market. The difference is their benefit. So thus, with a simple tool, we have now translated fairly subjective concepts of very happy or pleased into dollar amounts. And thus this tool is a very potent tool and is used a lot in policy discussion.